Joining us now is Scott Cochrane, who serves as the Executive Director of Willow Creek, Canada. And his desire is to see the church in Canada become as healthy and vibrant as possible. And we want him to tell us about their upcoming annual Leadership Summit conference as well. It's exciting. It's expected to be attended by over 120,000 people, if it's like last year. Scott, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ron. Good to be here.
Good to have you with us. Now, from Kelowna, BC.
That's correct.
Beautiful part of the country.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
Well, Scott, for those who might not be familiar with the term name, Willow Creek,
Right.
as many, especially in leadership, Christian leadership in Canada would know, but for our average viewer, explain what Willow Creek is all about.
Yeah, well, Willow Creek is, first and foremost, it's a church based just outside of Chicago and founded by its senior pastor, Bill Hybels. And they founded this church with some young people back in 1975, and it started to grow, and it started to grow. God was blessing this church in so many ways. People were coming to Christ, and as a result, they really had a desire to coach other churches as well. And that birthed something called the Willow Creek Association, which is a branch of the church designed to help other churches. And a few years later, it was starting to expand around the world. In fact, we opened a Canadian office for Willow Creek, and that's based in Kelowna, BC, which is my home.
All right. It certainly has had a major impact on Christian leaders around the world.
It really has. And it's, one of the things that Bill Hybels often says is, and I believe this to my core, and that is that the local church is the hope of the world. Mm-hmm. And that's because the local church stewards the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And then Bill goes on, he says something else, which I really like. He says, not only is the local church the hope of the world, but its future rests primarily in the hands of its leaders. Mm-hmm. Not just its pastors, but everyone who carries influence and responsibility and so on. And so our passion is to develop those leaders to their fullest.
My father, David Maines, has always said, because he was a pastor years ago, and when he launched into television, he always said God's address on earth is the local church, his primary address. And so we certainly believe the same as you. Yeah. Now, do you see hope for the church in Canada?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think truly more than ever. More than ever. You know, unfortunately, many of us read the headlines and we see the trends. It's not the Canada that we grew up in, some will say, and so on. But Ron, I have to tell you that the church in Canada is starting to burst out in ways we haven't seen in years and years and years. There are so many signs of health and vitality. And a big part of what our ministry wants to do is to sort of add fuel onto that fire, of seeing what God is already doing and then coming alongside and saying, how can we serve this? How can we see the church in Canada grow and impact even more lives?
That's good to hear. Now, this Leadership Summit began 17 years ago, and with about 400 people, something like that.
That's right.
And now, last year, it was attended because modern technology and video feeds around the world, 120,000.
Isn't that unbelievable?
How do you account for that kind of growth?
Well, that's a great question, and what an exciting story that is. You're right, it started with 400 people. Bill just said, if there's anyone who wants to talk about leadership and let's try to grow as leaders together, we'll do that. So 400 leaders gathered down in Chicago 17 years ago, and now you look at what's happened. And I think it's, first of all, because God is at work in His church. And His plan is to develop churches through the influence of leaders. And that idea and that concept has simply caught on around the world. And then I think you look at simply the quality of the faculty that this conference has assembled year after year after year. You know, just the best, sharpest thinkers in leadership, certainly from the Christian world, certainly from some of the world's top, best-known pastors and Christian communicators and so on. But also people have been attracted because leaders can learn from leaders from any field. And so there have been top leaders from the military. Colin Powell was one of our speakers a few years ago. There have been top speakers from the world of academia, from all sorts of different institutions, and from business, from the marketplace, and so on. And leaders love to get these principles and say, now, how does that apply to my leadership? How does that apply to my church? I think that's one of the reasons why it's simply grown so explosively around the world. You know, of those 120,000 who attended last year, over 7,000 were right here in Canada. And we're so excited to see how that's going to continue to expand to serve Canadian leaders.
And we're going to be giving some information shortly about how people can connect and who should attend. I want to ask you that question, but let's go to a little video clip because it really gives a good overall picture of what's happening for this year. Let's have a look.
Some of the best leadership lessons I've ever learned have come from very unlikely candidates.
I think sometimes the difference between success and failure is a very fine line.
What dream is waiting for you just on the other side of your fear?
How long do we keep stretching ourselves to do what doesn't seem possible to do?
You don't need charisma to become a leader. Being a leader gives you charisma.
God has a great plan for your life. It starts when you do what God has given you to do right now.
Well, Scott, that sounds exciting.
Isn't it,
what
though?
a lineup of speakers. And I saw the president of Starbucks there.
Yeah, and that's remarkable that we finally have him. We've bbeen trying to get Howard Schultz, the president of Starbucks, into the summit for years. And again, Ron, he's obviously a successful, prominent corporate businessman. But he has a message to say to church leaders who are maybe struggling with trying to gain new momentum for their local church. And I hear these stories all the time across Canada. You know, church leaders are saying, oh, if we could only find a way to turn this thing around. You know, maybe things have been sliding, losing momentum. Well, that was Starbucks' story. You know, a few years ago, Howard Schultz left the company and the brand of Starbucks just went into free fall. Well, Schultz comes back in and he started exercising leadership that turned that thing around. Now, one thing I often mention, I was talking to a pastor in Calgary about this last week. See, in the church, we have a secret weapon. We have the Holy Spirit, too. So Howard Schultz couldn't have deployed that necessarily in Starbucks. But we can still learn from those principles. You know, what are the business principles that he used there, which we might incorporate, powered and fueled by the Holy Spirit, to see the church in Canada be all she can be? It's going to be tremendous.
That certainly is. Now, there's a specific Canadian component that we at Crossroads are kind of partnering with you at Willow Creek, Canada to produce. Tell us about that.
Oh, this is so exciting, Ron. We've been doing the summit in Canada for 11 years now. Of the 17 years, we have been doing it in Canada for 11 of those. And through technology, as you mentioned, we've simply taken the leadership conference from the United States and then rebroadcast it in a sense in Canada. And it's been powerful and it's been effective. But if there's one question that I get asked more than any other, it's when are we finally going to see a Canadian talking to Canadians about our church? Because, you know, of course, there's a lot of similarities between the spiritual state of the United States and that of Canada. There's a lot of similarities between the state of the church in the United States and that in Canada. But there are some important and significant differences too. And we've never had an opportunity to talk about those things before, to really look church leaders in the eye in Canada and say, we understand, this is our reality, this is what we're dealing with, let's talk about that. Our challenge has been, we have content that we can deliver to Canadians. We simply haven't had the means to do that. Well, about a year ago, we started dreaming and praying and said, Lord, how could we possibly deliver our message in the summit to Canadians? And Ron, I truly believe that this was a Holy Spirit-breathed moment when we were in a board meeting and said, you know what? Someone should call Crossroads Communications. And we did, and we were just so warmly received here. That led to a journey and a partnership that will see our two ministries working together for the first time to actually have a Canadian speaker talking to Canadians in the summit this year. We're so excited about that.
And we are too. Glad we could help out. And so people are wondering, well, who should really attend? Is it just like pastors and business leaders and those in kind of really high up positions of leadership? Just before we give the information, tell us who should attend.
If a person is passionate about their local church, they need to be at the Leadership Summit this year in order to be envisioned and filled again. It's not only for pastors, although pastors certainly leverage this event for their own leadership and for that of their churches. We found, Ron, that churches who tend to bring almost what we would call a critical mass of their church this event can really impact that local church. We've had churches who will bring as many as 20, 50, 100 people or more to this event, because what it does, it casts a vision for everyone in the congregation now. They're talking about the same issues. They're using the same language kind of thing. So we would encourage any person who loves Christ, loves their local church, and wants their own leadership to develop, and wants their church to be all that she can be, they should be there this year.
All right, Scott, now's the time for people to get their pens out. So, let's have some information come up on the screen, and you can explain to us how people can connect with you.
Well, the summit itself is September 29th and 30th. And by the way, it should be emphasized that we have almost 25 locations right across the country this year, from St. John's, Newfoundland to Vancouver Island. So chances are there's one near you. And if you want to get involved, visit our website, and that's growingleadership.com. Or if you'd rather pick up the phone, give us a call. And we're at 1-800-804-0777, and we'd love to talk with you.
All right, thanks, Scott. I know that a lot of people are going to be attending and plugging into this, which is going to be really a global event. And do you expect another 120,000 like last year?
That's what it's looking like so far. Very excited about that.
It is. Well, Scott, thanks for stopping by and letting us know. And God bless you in your ongoing work with Willow Creek, Canada. It's so important. And God bless you. And stay tuned. More 100 Huntley Street to come.